for joining us to this public webinar about sensitivity labels. As I mentioned to some of you, my apologies to the people that connect previously. Result that in the previous session on May, I was having some issues with my computer, but now that was resolved, and I am back with this public webinar about sensitivity labels. Darren is participating in this one to help us with your questions. If we have some questions, please feel free to start asking. I know that Darren is a subject matter expert on Purview. He will help us to easily answer some of the questions, but there is some point I know that Darren will stop me to start answering the questions. What I want to do in this session is share from the field all about my knowledge on sensitivity labels. Remember that the session will be recorded, and we have a survey that please, for us, is very important to your participation, your feedback to go forward and prepare other kind of presentations. The agenda is we will talk about global concepts about data leak vectors, a concept that I am using that is a digital information threatment policy, how we can go in from that data, the traditional data classification policy, to a digital information threatment policy. With that, we can start discussing about labels design, and we will jump immediately to the demo using the new Purview portal. Remember that now on June was released the new Purview portal, and on November, the compliance portal will be disappear and replaced totally for this new Purview portal. We will discuss about the sensitivity labels configuration. We will talk about permissions, commandlets, troubleshooting, reporting. Let's go in that case. About data leak vectors. How complex is our environment today? Here, in any of our organization, we can have an internal user. That internal user have access to a local drive, internet access, external devices, local third-party applications, local repositories. This is a very big Pandora box normally when we start reviewing what is here, which kind of information that we have here. We can have a lot of bad surprises. This same user can share information with areas inside the organization or process inside the organization. This same user can start storing information in different kind of cloud services, like third-party cloud services, Microsoft 365, or Azure. To add some more complexity, that same user can connect from outside of the organization using personal devices, corporate devices, or mobile devices accessing to the cloud information. We can find contractors or interns that are accessing to the same information. We can have API that access to our information. And finally, that appear is the less problem, external users, family, friends, customers, providers, vendors, and several other kind of people. All these people is accessing to data. All these red lines can be a data leak vector. For that reason, when we talk about Microsoft Purview, when we talk about data governance, we need to have in mind that there is several pieces. Microsoft, you can see Microsoft Purview as as a kind of puzzle with several pieces, and depend how we can join these pieces. Finally, we will have a good picture or a bad picture. It's not the same take a very young child to try to join these pieces in a puzzle to have someone with knowledge organizing this puzzle. With all of this in mind, okay, the first question, what can I do to start protecting my data? And here we are not talking about Copilot. That is another very big topic to start discussing. But with sensitivity labels, and that is the main topic for this public webinar, is we can protect the file with sensitivity labels. And here coming my mantra, with sensitivity labels, we can define who have access and the permissions granted for that access. Who have access and the permissions granted for that access. And policies define who can apply the label. In this case, focus on sensitivity labels. The protection, when we use protection, the protection is embedded in the file. That means no matter where the file resides, the protection live on that file. That is very important. I know that is not the final solution. Finally, the data is still stored in different places. But we will have other public webinars to discuss about data loss prevention, to talk about maybe insider risk management, to talk about another very important concept that I will explain for sensitivity labels. On this case, I will focus on sensitivity labels for Microsoft 365. But Microsoft Purview information protection have one of the foot is in the Azure side for other cloud services, and that is called Purview Data Map, and it's something that I want to present in another session. Today, we will focus on Microsoft 365, how we can protect the data, no matter that the file resides here. Purview Data Map is for structured data like SQL, Oracle, and other services that reside on cloud. And let's go. Okay, today, when we talk about a data classification policy, we can discuss a lot about pros and cons. I am open to discuss that on LinkedIn and in other sessions. But in general, it's a well done no policy. Several people have a data classification policy for many years ago. And normally, a big previous effort was did to identify all the information assets. And normally, in that information asset, in that data classification policy, we can find a data retention table that say for this information asset, we can retain this information, who is the owner. But in general, the big deal with the data classification policy is that policy is thought for final document and not for our daily work. And when we try to implement the data classification policy with sensitivity labels, we start having several of headaches for that same reason, because doesn't match the data classification policy with our daily work. And if you don't have a data classification policy, a cons is that you need a lot of effort to identify all the information asset and define who have access to what and the permissions and several other things. And in a complex information asset that contains several different sensitive information types is established which is the main sensitive information types to apply protection. Why I am saying that? Because I saw in a lot of customers that they have some labels like confidential to apply when some PCI informations appear, or highly confidential where when some PII information appear. But when we have complex environment, we can find more than one sensitive information types in a file. Uh, and as I mentioned, it's focused on final document. In this digital information threatment policy that I am leveraged as a concept, the big deal is, well, this is not to replace. It's not to replace the data classification policy. There is a lot of effort. Here we can make a synergy between these different policies. But with the digital information threatment policy, what we can do is cover the daily work, the draft documents, the daily emails that are sent, have something more intuitive for end users, focus on any kind of document. But we will need some initial effort. When I talk about this information asset, as I mentioned, information asset, and let me do a kind of parenthesis here. Information asset is not the same as sensitive information type. What happened? As I mentioned, we can have an information asset with name, address, email, phone number, financial information. That pattern, that structure, we can call sensitive information type, a complex sensitive information type. Today, we can talk about trainable classifiers, we can talk about exact data match, document fingerprint, and the basic sensitive information types. But depend on the source, that same information asset can be called employees, partners, providers, customers, vendors, students, teachers, and several other names. And if we go to the data classification policy and we start reviewing that complex information asset, we can identify that normally that is not consistent because we can identify that for the same different kind of sensitive information types, we can have different classifications depending on the source. But each sensitive information types is have their own confidentiality. It's a little complex to explain, but we can find that maybe if we review our data classification policy, that for the same mix of sensitive information types, for employees, we will define this information as internal. But for customers, we will define that same kind of sensitive information type as a highly confidential because are our customers. But the tools in the background are detecting the sensitive information types, not the source. In that case, have the capability to distinguish between one or another is complex. And the same happen with the end users. End users in complex OneNote, a meeting report, a meeting note in general, end users doesn't know how they can classify that information. For that reason, I am leveraging this change of paradigm with this digital information threat policy that is not only for classified information, is to define related to the same data governance, the same data lake vectors that we was viewing at the beginning, where the data can be stored, with who I can share the information, who have access. I can access from an unmanaged device or from managed device. There is several things that needs to be defined to work in a digital area. Now, with all that concept on mind, and please, if something is not totally clear, feel free to ask. I am seeing that Darren and we have Dominic as well participating in this session. They are happy to share, but if you have some questions related to this digital information threat policy with all the concepts that I am sharing, please feel free to ask. Now, what happened? As I mentioned previously, my mantra. Sensitivity labels define who have access and the permissions granted for that access, who have access and the permissions granted for that access, and policies define who can apply the label. Policies define who can apply the label. It's not the same. Happens that I saw in a lot of customers that they create labels and they publish the labels to anyone. You don't need to have permissions to apply a label to have the capability to access to a file. Because, again, I will repeat this one several times, labels define who have access and the permissions granted. We can give permissions to external people to access with some restrictions to our files. And for that same reason, they don't need to apply the labels. We need certain kind of users that they need to apply the labels, but not necessarily on the labels. We need to, on the policy, we need to involve to the entire organization because the label define who have access. In that order of idea, I've been working this design with several customers using the same wording that coming for the data classification policy, public, internal, sorry, I jump one, public, internal, confidential, highly confidential, or restricted, highly restricted, or sensitive, highly sensitive. The big deal here, another tip when we define the name of the labels, if you don't have a data classification policy yet, we need to take care with the words that we use because, as an example, if you use confidential and restrict, maybe for Darren, restrict is more restrictive than confidential, or for me, confidential is more restrictive than confidential. For that reason, we need to try to use words that doesn't generate any kind of misunderstanding from the end users. For that reason, use confidential and highly confidential, or restricted and highly restricted, or sensitive and highly sensitive, make more sense that start using different kind of work, different kind of words.
Sebastian, do you mind if I just jump in very quickly?
Yes.
Will you be going through, as part of the presentation, just referring to how users will know how and what labels to actually apply? Because there's a question just popped up about your current slide, whereby, you know, just mentioning if you ask most users, they wouldn't be able to tell you when and why they should use a confidential label across like a highly confidential label. Will you
I
be
will
going through that as part of the presentation as well?
yes, I will touch
Yep,
that point right now in this same slide.
superb. Thank you.
Yeah, and inclusive, this design is aligned with the new changes that come in soon to sensitivity labels. Uh, what happened? We need to, and I will answer that a specific question that you shared, Darren. Parent labels will disappear. That is the first thing that I will say. Maybe Dominic or you, Darren, have the that public notice that was shared, coming several changes related to this concept of parent labels and sublabels. The first thing related to the design and based on and here coming the to break the paradigm, we need to see the parent labels or the groups, that is the new name that coming for Purview labels. We will group the labels. These parent labels will be called in another way, but we can see as a kind of category: internal, confidential, highly confidential. There is no inherent permissions between the parent labels and the sublabels. There is no inheritance. Each label have their own permissions. That is something that we need to have in mind. The only thing that is inherent between the parent labels and the sublabels is the color. That is the only thing that is inherent. In that case, by design, and that is the normally the point that I discuss with the customers. By design, we will set a group of permissions for each category. What's happened? Microsoft Purview have 4 presets, and we on the demo I will show all of that. Have 4 preset of group of permissions, call it co-owner, co-author, reviewer, and viewer. Or you can set your own permissions, centralize, or you can let your user set custom permissions. By the way, I don't recommend use custom permissions. I saw in a lot of customers to, in parentheses, in quote, try to simplify the use of sensitivity labels to give the capability to add custom permissions to anyone, instead to start setting the permissions at the beginning on this design. And what's happened? Yes, it's very easy to start using it. Anyone can start using it immediately. But the big deal is after 6 months, after 1 year, you can have 100,000 of documents with custom permissions. And if someone moved to another area or someone coming to work with us in our team, we need to start working in all the old documents, giving permissions to the new guy to access to the file. And that is a very big issue. We need to avoid use custom permissions. Custom permissions is only for a specific use cases, and I will try to explain that. Now, back to the question from Darren. When we define by design the permissions, and I'm saying by design because we don't have inherent change of permissions between the labels. By design, we can set a group of permissions. We can use the preset or we can use our own group of permissions. And as I say at the beginning on my mantra, sensitivity labels define who have access and the permissions granted, who have access and the permissions granted. Here, we are defining the permissions granted and who have access. We can set that easily for the end users in the sub-label name. In this case, the entire organization have co-owner permissions. Only full-time employees have co-owner permissions. And the other part of the mantra is policies define who can apply the labels. Policies define who can apply the labels. In that order of idea, we can set a global policy for the entire organization, a global policy for the entire organization with a subset of labels to anyone can apply those labels. And then we can create different policies. We can create different policies for each area, defining the sub-labels available for them. What happened? In this is only a design, it's only a sample. I've been working this design with several customers. We was working with only 3 categories, with other we was working with 4 categories, and with others we was working with 5 categories, but always maintaining the same concept and the same structure. The category, the parent labels defined by design, the permissions granted, and who have those permissions, we use explicit on the sub-label name. Now, why in this sample HR have only one sub-label? Because I can go to HR to ask to them, okay, in which way here, and this is coming from the previous slide, I am not breaking my head based on the content of the file. Yes, we will see that we can help to the end users to recommend to apply some labels based on the content, but I am not breaking my head about the content. Is what we can do with data. For that reason, this digital information threatment policy, the threatment policy, is because it's what we can do with the data. In that order of idea, I am setting a group of permissions for each category, and who have those permissions is the people that is explicit on the sub-label. And now, backing back to this HR, I can go to the HR and ask to them how they work. And they can tell me, okay, in this area, we trust in all the people and all the people have access to any document. Okay, in that case, they don't need confidential or maybe highly confidential because, and here another parenthesis, and we will see that on now on the demo. Co-owner have all the permissions. You can do anything with the document. Anyone can change the label. With co-author, you have someone that is the protection owner, the responsible for that, and is the only one that can change the label. The rest of the people can start working on the file, but uh, no other people in that area can change the label. And with viewer, well, you can see view only the files, or with reviewer, the people can still working on the file, but they cannot print or copy the data. And only the protection owner or only the one that have the right permissions will be able to change the label. Based on that same thing, I can go to the legal area and ask to them, okay, in which way do you work? Did you did your work daily? And they can say, okay, here we have a lawyer in charge that define if the file can be shared or not. The rest of the people work on the file. In that case, For them, an internal legal doesn't make sense because they don't need to anyone have full permissions over the file. That is almost clear. I am seeing that Darren and Dominic are answering some questions on the chat. But again, feel free to raise your hand and make any question related to this point. Now, I will go to the demo. As I mentioned previously, I will work in the new portal. The new portal is purview.microsoft.com. And as I mentioned previously, this new portal is global available from June, the past month, and this portal will replace the compliance portal at the end of this year. My last knowledge is at the end of November. In that order of idea, we need to start working as soon as possible in this new portal. When you access to purview.microsoft.com, we can see some of the different tools. Sometimes information protection doesn't appear immediately here at the beginning. What we need to do is go to view all solutions, and here under data security, we will find information protection. And this is the new interface for information protection. If you was working or still working in the compliance portal, you will maybe you will a little lost trying to find settings, or if you are using the MIP scanner. I have another public session on the past that I was talking about exit data match. I was talking about sensitive information types. I was talking about a MIP scanner. Uh, you can review my YouTube channel to find this section. Uh, I will share the link on the chat if you want to learn a little more about sensitive information types, EDM, MIP scanner. You can find that in that channel. But related to information protection, now here at the top right, we can find the settings, and related to information protection, here we can find the settings for co-authoring. This is very important. Please, this is very important to validate in your environment, is the co-authoring. All the new stuff that are available, all the new features that are available under sensitivity labels, that mean autosave, collaboration, default labels, use Office Online to open protected files, needs to enable this capability. If that capability is not enabled yet, maybe you will see several issues when you try to use sensitivity labels with all the features. That is very important. But nevertheless, we need to take care on this point, because when you enable this co-authoring feature, all features will not be available. And one of that features that normally impact to the organization is the old additional properties that we was able to add to the document. With the new sensitivity labels and with the co-authoring capability, that advanced properties that we found on the files was moved to the metadata on the file, on the same file. I will show how you can find that, but it's a little more complex. That is the big deal that you need to take care on that point. And here you can find all the configuration about the information protection scanning. That is, in general, the other step related to sensitivity labels. Let's back to the main menu about information protection. In this new information protection, we will find some report. Here, this is another big change between the old compliance portal and the new Purview portal is we have immediately access to the classifiers, sensitive information types, trainable classifier, exact data match, and the Explorer. What's happened? Content Explorer will not be called Content Explorer anymore. Now Content Explorer will be known as a Data Explorer. For that reason, we have the Microsoft Purview Explorer, that is Data Explorer and Activity Explorer. You can see here very quickly that Content Explorer and Data Explorer is almost the same interface with some little changes, but in general, Data Explorer is the evolution of Content Explorer. And we have the Activity Explorer that permit us to see the daily activities that are happening. We will discuss a little more about that. On report, we can have a general overview about what is happening with the data scanning. You can see that they have some stuff related to data map. I hope to do soon a public webinar only to talk about data map, data catalog, and all the part that are related to Azure services. Recommendations, this is new, coming from the old AAP when it was located on Azure for the Azure Information Protection, when we can find some recommendations because we have an store without protection, we have some document with sensitive information types that are not recommended. This is a relative new, maybe for some of you are not available yet. And finally, we arrive to sensitivity labels, and we will focus here. The first thing to have in mind, as I mentioned, sensitivity labels define who have access and the permissions granted, and policies define who can apply the label. If you don't have policies, nothing happens with the label. In that order of idea, you can have 100, the limit is 500 today sensitivity labels that can be created, and nothing happened with that sensitivity labels until that sensitivity labels are published. If the labels are not published, that nothing happened with the end user. Feel free to start working on your sensitivity labels and start testing. With the policy, we will define who can apply. In that case, it's easy to create a pilot for this kind of technology. When we create a label, and let me show here, when we create a label, we need to define a name. This is a unique name that only the admins can see. It's a unique name that only admin can see. End users never see this name. First recommendation, if you create a label and you was using the label, but you are not happy with the name, please don't delete the label. You can change the display name at any moment. The display name is the name that end users see in their interfaces. That means, let me go here. This is my user James. If James open Outlook or open Word, any of the cases, I just installed Office. Maybe here is was taking a time to refresh. And here you can see the sensitivity labels that are available for this user. These names that you are seeing here, public, internal, confidential, are the display name. That means if the name for you is not the best one, instead to create a new one, start publishing, migrating, or updating the labels, please change only the display name and that can be enough. The other thing is the priority. This is very important, and let me duplicate in this case to go back to the sensitivity labels. We will see that when we create sensitivity labels and the policies, and if we apply, integrate with the DLP or with auto labeling, there is some configurations that say apply the most restrictive label, or if several, we will see that in a while, we can recommend or automatically apply labels based on the content. But if, as we say at the beginning, when we have a complex information asset that have different kind of sensitive information type, the label that will be recommend when several different sensitive information types match with different labels, the label that will be recommend is the highest one, but it's not the most restrictive. We will see that some documentation say the most restrictive, but it's not the most restrictive. It's the highest one. And the highest one is only based on the purity. That means here I have my highly confidential, but all the rest of labels here at bottom, no matter if doesn't have protection or have protection, or I use it for a draft, all the labels here at the bottom are considered more restrictive than my highly confidential. In that order of idea, when we create the labels, we need to take care on the order. And here is easily to move up, down, or change the priority to move to a specific spot quickly. Please be aware of that. The other thing that I will share that's very important, I saw in other customers that because it's a worldwide company, they start creating labels in Spanish, labels in French, labels in English. Through the web interface, we cannot do that. But through PowerShell, we can set different language for the same label. In that case, we can create here only one highly confidential, and then using PowerShell, we can set different display names, different descriptions, different um, additional information for each language. That is very important and I will try to show that. Now, backing back to sensitivity labels. We have the name. We have the display name. This, as I mentioned, we can change at any moment the display name. We have the priority. In this case, by default, all the labels are added to the bottom, but then we can move to the right position. And here coming, oh, thanks, Christopher, for to share that link. I was looking for that to share later. That is very helpful for the language that I was explaining recently. That can be very helpful. That use Microsoft Translator and PowerShell to translate sensitivity labels. The link that Christoph shared on the chat. Then we have description for users. Here coming another big deal between the data classification policy and this digital information threat policy. Normally, we can find that the data classification policy have two technical or two legal description. This information can be shared internally or externally, totally or partly, depend of the level of the business impact that this information can be generated. I've been working on IT for the last 25 years. I've been the support guy and I know how the end users think. They don't read that. Two technical descriptions or two legal descriptions are not the best way. My recommendation when we start establishing what we can do with the data is try to write in plain English the description. This information can be accessed for anyone, or this information can be accessed for the legal department. Only the protection owner can change, or you need to change to a more accurate label if you need to share outside of your area. We need to define descriptions that make sense to the end users. And finally, the description for admins that is not mandatory. The previously was called housekeeping information. This is the label for the initial design, or this label was created request by this area. Let me. This is only for training purpose. Here coming several other points that we need to have on mind. Sensitivity labels can be used for three different scopes: items, groups and site, and schematized data assets. We will focus on the two in the first two scopes: items, groups and site. And the third one is for Purview data map that I mentioned at the I want to do another public webinar to focus only on this one, because it's very, this required a lot of additional knowledge to start using a Purview data map and Purview data catalog. The other thing that we can find here under items is we can use the sensitivity labels for files, emails, and meetings. And here there is another thing for groups and site. Something that normally is can generate a kind of mistake. Group and site is not to define a default label for documents. These sensitivity labels for groups and site is for access control. It's not for permissions to the file. That normally generate a lot of noise and a lot of mistakes when we start using sensitivity labels. For that reason, my recommendation in that order of idea is use or create sensitivity labels only for items, and then you can create other sensitivity labels for groups and site to avoid that misunderstanding from the end user's perspective. Why only I want to use sensitivity labels only for emails or only for files? I will explain. In the auto labeling, I have a good exercise for that when we can use only for emails. As an example, there is a public information when you can use sensitivity labels to protect your voicemails. When someone called to you and you receive a voicemail, we can apply a sensitivity labels to avoid forward that kind of information, to protect that someone shared that information. That is a sample. Or maybe I want to create a sensitivity labels for some specific C-level users to send a note to the rest of the organization without the capability to reply to all. That are some samples why we want to separate on the under items sensitivity labels for files or sensitivity labels for emails. When we go here, I select only items, we can enable the control access and the virtual marks. Control, this this specific name was changed at least, I don't know, in the last 5 years, maybe 5 or 6 times, was called encryption, was called permissions, was called in different ways. But here, this today is called control access and is related to the permissions granted to the file. For the last one, we need a Teams Premium license. This last one, I don't have a Teams Premium on my environment, but this one permits to, as an example, protect this kind of calls, and we can add watermarks to the recorded section. We can protect how the information is shared on this kind of meetings or in a common meetings. And here coming the big deal related to the different configuration, and I will show some explanation. When we talk about let users assign permissions now, these are the custom permissions that I was mentioned at the beginning when I start talking about the protection. When you set let users apply permissions, here we will see this pop-up that permit to identify the permissions that we want to add to this document. As I mentioned, I don't recommend to use this one wide to all of the organization. Try to use only on certain cases. Maybe the CFO need to send some sensitive data only to the CEO. Okay, you need, but for the daily work, this is not the best. But I will give to you a tip here. Several people here, you can add groups, or we can looking for the legal group, or we can add some specific users. But another thing that we can do here is, as an example, we can add a specific domain. In that case, anyone under this domain will have read permissions. If I am using custom permissions, the custom permissions permit to use domains instead of a specific account or groups. That is something that can be very helpful. The other big deal and it's something that I will try to explain. When you use custom permissions, here we can see that the document is protect. I will save this document. Give me a moment. I will set here on this computer some permissions, assign it. Let me close and open again to be clear that all the permissions was granted. When you move from a label with custom permissions to a label without protection, and I will review that because I believe that I make the change. When you move a label without protection, the protection still remain when you use custom permissions. What's happened? And I believe that I did that in that specific label. To avoid that specific behavior to the labels that doesn't have protection, like a public, we can use this option, remove access control. This is the way that resolve the problem with the custom permissions. Maybe some of you was having that issue when you was using custom permissions and you try to apply a public one, the permissions remain. The way to remove that is using that option on the label. This is the custom permissions. Now, when we go to assign permissions, this is my recommendation, use assign permissions. The first thing that we can find is user access to content expire. In this case, we can set a specific deadline for access to the file. And this guy, in that case, all the consumer for this document will lose access in a specific day or after some number of days, maybe 90 days. Only the protection owner, the guy that applied the protection, will be still have access to the file, or anyone with a co-owner permission. Why we want to use that? As an example, I was working with a telco company. They have a different services plan, and they have a specific area that share the prices to all the vendors. They use a lot this capability because in that case, they send every queue all the new prices, and vendors cannot use old prices because they lost access to the Excel files that they are using to sell the products. That is a sample about that. Now, this is another very important that previously in the old AAP portal was set normally for 7 days. My recommendation is set on 4 or 5 days, allow offline access. What mean allow offline access? Means that someone that is traveling or have problems with internet access will still have access to the file and still work on the file. And after 4 days, that user will need to connect again to validate the credentials. The big deal is if someone leave the organization, and as an example, the allow offline access is set to always. If that user leave the organization with a hard drive with a lot of documents, that user can have access to the documents. Meanwhile, that the user doesn't connect to internet, that user can continue accessing to the file. Now, allow offline access always. By the way, first of all, every time that you open a protected file, The first time you need to have internet access to validate your access, the first time. After the first time, some temporary cache files are stored in the local app data folder that contain the access, the permissions granted, and normally every time that you connect to internet, that information is refreshed. But this configuration permits to continue accessing if you don't have internet access. Now, the allow offline access set to always. Normally, the worst case is only 30 days because Microsoft 365 apps have a life cycle token that normally is set by default on 30 days. Every 30 days, the Microsoft 365 apps are connecting under the hood to the Microsoft 365 services to refresh that token. It's not too bad always. It's normally it means 30 days, but my recommendation is set maybe the most longest weekend that you can have and set in 4 or 5 days to permit continue working on the files, but at least have certain level of protection. The other option is never. But the big deal with never is if you have any problem with your internet access or if you're traveling, you will not able to work in that file. Maybe for some highly sensitive document, we can use this configuration. By default, normally I use this one. And now, coming the permissions. Here, remember my mantra, labels define who have access and the permissions granted, who have access and the permissions granted, and policies, we will see the policies, define who can apply the label. In this case, who have access? All users and group in my organization. Is all this include guest on the tenant? All the users and groups that live in your tenant will have access to the files. Which kind of permissions? We need to define that. But who have access? This is the first. Then, at any authenticated user. Any authenticated user is a kind of anonymous access because means anyone around the world with a social ID or a Microsoft account can access to the file. Why, in that case, I want to use that? Because, I don't know, several companies by laws or regulations, they need to publish the financial report at the end of the year. But that you need to, by the law, you are forced to publish that in your web page, but you want to avoid that information can be copied or can be shared or can be printed. The law say that you need to publish. Okay, I am publishing, I am giving access to any authenticated user, but I will set the permissions, what we can do with the data. Then the most common, specific users or specific groups. Normally, this is the most used. I want to give permissions or to the all legal department, to the all HR or the all company, but all company only company users and not the guest. Those are some stuff. And here there is another very important point. Mail-enabled groups. Mail-enabled groups. What happened? When we work directly on Microsoft Entra and we want to create groups, here when we select groups, we have only security that is not mail-enabled and Microsoft 365 groups. The big deal with the Microsoft 365 groups that under the hood, Team sites are created, SharePoint sites are created, and several other services. And you are mentioning that we are using groups to apply labels or to set the permissions. This first doesn't work, and this another one is too wide in general in features. What happened? If we go to the Microsoft Admin Center, if we go to the Microsoft Admin Center, here on groups, we have other options that are not available through the Microsoft Entra portal or through the 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 entra.microsoft.com or directly from the Azure portal. Here, what's happened, we can create distribution list that can be used for sensitivity labels. You can see I was using the legal team, and here is the legal team. Or I can use mail-enabled security group. In the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, I have the capability to add mail-enabled security group or distribution list that can be used for sensitivity labels, because to use sensitivity labels, you need mail-enabled groups. And these kind of groups are not available through the Microsoft Entra portal. Why? I was asking internally without answer yet, but that is something that we can have on mind. We can define who have access, and the last one, this one can be very helpful. A specific email address. I can give a specific access to my corporate account. I can give specific permissions to that specific domain, or I can get another external domain, and anyone in that domain will have access. Which kind of access? And then we can go back to this point. Here, we can define the permissions. As I mentioned previously, we on Microsoft Purview, we can find 4 different presets of permission. Co-owner, that means you have all the permissions over the file. Co-author, that you can have only almost all the permissions except change the label. Reviewer, that you can still change the content of the file. You can still edit the file, but you cannot copy, cut, or print the content. You can edit, you can modify, you can delete, but if you try to print or you can try to copy, you will not able to do that. And a viewer, that you can only view permissions. Or if this preset doesn't work for you, you can always set a subset of permissions and define the permissions that you need for that specific sensitivity label. Here, another tip that is very helpful. This copy and extract that disappear on reviewer and viewer on co-author is still enabled. When you remove that, you cannot do Control C, Control X to copy. But the other big deal that happened, if you are sharing, uh, if you are sharing a document through Teams or through any other application, that content will be set on a black. You will see only a black square, and no one will have access to see the information. And what happened in that order of ideas, when we when we remove that permissions and you are in a meeting room and you use solutions like a click to share, AirWatch, or other solutions to project to another monitor, that information will not be able to share because that tools work capturing, making some quick screenshot of the data to share in an external monitor. For that reason, that is a common case that happen when we use that configuration. The other thing that is important to know, in one label, we can have different kind of permission. In one label, we can have different kind of permission. In that case, I was saying, co-author, reviewer, viewer are not able to change the label. Only the user that applied the label, always the user that applied the label will consider as a protection owner and always will have full permissions to make any change on that specific file. But what we can do is add a specific group. As an example, for some labels, I am using a data risk group. This data security risk group, that is an empty group that I use to access to the data if the owner is not available. And in that case, anyone that is inside of this group will have permissions to access to the data. Today, in the actual right management service, and here another parenthesis that is very important, and I was not sharing at the beginning. Sensitivity labels doesn't have protection. This is a very important point to understand. Sensitivity labels doesn't have protection. When you apply or when you enable protection in a sensitivity label, under the hood, an RMS template is created and linked to the sensitivity label. That means when I am applying a sensitivity labels that have protection, under the hood is not the sensitivity label that the one that is protecting the file, is the RMS template that was created under the hood and was linked to the sensitivity label. That is very important because it happens a lot when you start publishing new labels. That the label is visible for the end users, but when they try to apply the label, they start seeing some errors, and normally they can read something like the RMS template is not available. That is because the RMS template that is associated to that sensitivity label take more time to be downloaded locally, because there is some digital signatures in the background, there are some certificate, there is some hash that needs to be validated to download the RMS template and avoid some man in the middle changing the encryption used for the protection. That is very important to have in mind. In this case, for this sensitivity label, I am adding this protection under the hood. An RMS template will be created with this specific configuration. And now I will go to content marking. Another big deal with the content marking is I don't want to you set a footer, but on my PPTs, I don't want to see that footer. Or you add a header for confidential, but the emails, on the emails, I am using a mail flow and I am applying a disclaimer, and I don't want to use another header. In that order of idea, let me come in here, internal, all employees. We have dynamics virtual marks that can be used. In this case, let me copy this specific case, and I will share here on the chat. This is not PowerShell, it's something that needs to be added directly here on the text. If I add this specific configuration, means that for this sensitivity label that I am creating, if I am using PowerPoint, that is the P, I will see a footer that say this presentation is confidential. If I apply this label on Outlook, Excel, or Word, I will not see any virtual mark because the virtual mark is set only for PowerPoint. And we can find Word, Excel, or Outlook. Normally, what we can do in the case of emails, using this configuration here on footer, if I use Word, Excel, or PowerPoint, I will see a footer that say confidential. If I use Outlook, Outlook will not put any virtual mark because it's not set in this configuration. Or the other thing that I can start playing, okay, for Word and Excel, I want a footer, but on the case of a PowerPoint, I want a watermark. In that case, you can see here that for PowerPoint, I will use a watermark. For Word and Excel, I will use a footer. And because Outlook is not appearing, for Outlook, I will not use any kind of virtual mark. That can be very helpful in these cases because I was listening a lot in several cases that I don't want to see a virtual mark on the presentation because the presentation have a layout and I don't want that. Or on Outlook, I don't want to see a footer or header because I use a mail flow to apply a disclaimer. That is very important to have in mind. And here coming another very big important point, auto-label. When we talk about auto-labeling, we have two different kind of auto-labeling. We have the client side, that is this part that we are configured, and we have the service side. Client side is related to the labels. If the labels are not published to the end users, if the labels are not published to the end users, this will not work. You need to publish the label to start working. With the auto-labeling, service side is an administrator that define certain rules to apply labels on SharePoint, OneDrive, or emails when the email is sent or is received to apply sensitivity labels. The same for the data that is stored on SharePoint and OneDrive. The only thing that we need to take care for SharePoint and OneDrive that today, I know that the product group is working to increase the rate, but today auto-labeling service side only apply 25,000 labels per day. No matter that the system the service can detect millions of matches in one day, but in but only can apply 25,000 labels per day.
Yep. Sebastian,
Yes,
just
please.
very, very quickly, it has been announced that in what's new for Purview, that is being changed to 100,000 per day now.
Okay, that's great. As I was saying, I know that the product group was working to increase
Yep.
that number.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that is great to know that will be.
Yep.
You have the date for that change? Or maybe
It's
Dominic?
in what's new. It's in what's new for July or what's new for June in the link. I will put it in
Okay.
there. It's going preview now, as I believe. Or
Well,
I'll find
instead
it and I'll post
100,000
it. Yeah,
instead 100,000 labels per day is still a small number. There
yeah,
is other ways to control. Remember that we can apply default labels on SharePoint, on OneDrive,
yep,
that every time that we save or create a new file, that
yeah,
new file will be protected.
yeah.
Thanks
So
for
I've just posted the link in the chat on that one.
Oh, that's great. Here on auto labeling client side, we can define the sensitive information types or trainable classifier that we can use. Here, there is another very important point to have in mind. Something that happened, I saw that case in more than once. Here we need to take care related to the group operator to set any of these or all of these. If it's set to all of these, in the document you need to have at least one match for each of these to recommend or automatically apply the label. Instead of any of these, that you need any of these matches. Okay, back to a previous point. If I have several sensitivity labels with different criteria about the sensitivity information types that are looking for, when more than one match with the sensitive information types, the highest, not the most restrictive, the highest in the priority list will be recommend or automatically apply. The other big deal related to automatically apply the label, and please don't kill the messenger because that is detected behavior. When it's set to automatically apply and the label is set manually, no matter that you have a match, the label will not change. What means that in a common case? I am writing an email and I know that the labels in my organization are mandatory. And for that reason, I set at the beginning the email as a public. And I start writing the email. And I forget to finish the email. And someone start asking me other things. And I back to the email late. And for some reason, I start adding, because someone asking me something, I start adding some additional information that is sensitive. Because I apply manually the label public at the beginning, and then no matter that I am adding sensitive information, the label will not change. What I recommend is use the recommend capability. With the recommend option, no matter that the label was set automatically by a rule or by default on SharePoint or manually apply, if the sensitive data inside of the document matches with this criteria, we will see a policy tip saying that we need to change the label anytime that the label matches with a highest criteria. And that is in general, as I mentioned, groups and site we will see in another label. And this another one is for Purview data map that I hope to take in another webinar. With that, we have our label. With this one, we have our label with certain conditions. Again, because I create the label by default using the default configuration, this new label that is called public webinar was added to the end of the list. And because it's added to the end of the list, This one is the one considered as a most restricted anytime that we set. Now, let's go to policies. And we need to start going more quick because the time is going fast. As I mentioned, policies define who can apply the label. Policies define who can apply the label. The recommendation in the in the presentation is have a global policy with a subset of labels for the entire organization, and then start creating other policies to add additional labels to the people. This is very important. When we have several policies that match with one user, we are not removing labels. We are adding more labels. That means if Darren is in the global policy and then I add Darren in the legal policy, Darren will see the global labels plus the additional labels for the additional policy. This is very important. Okay, what we can define on the policies. Let me go to the configuration. The first thing is we will define the labels that can be applied from anyone that is in this policy. We can use the admin unit. Admin unit is another world, can be very helpful, but needs a lot of additional effort and configuration. We can discuss admin unit. Admin units can be used on DLP, Purview, administration, several things. We will skip for that. You can see that right now I am applying my global policy to the entire organization, and then coming certain configurations. This one I recommend all the time. The first one I recommend to use all the time. That is, user must provide a justification to remove a label or lower the classification. Here coming another very important point to have in mind that normally is not clear enough. When you are working on sublabels, on sublabels doesn't exist the concept, or doesn't work the concept of upgrade or downgrade. That means I can move from internal logistic to internal FTE, and that is only considered as a change of label, but it's not considered as a downgrade or upgrade. The downgrade or the upgrade will be considered only if I move between the parent labels. By the way, you can review the logs and you can identify that kind of activities, but in the interface for the end user, you can move between the sub-labels under the same parent label, and in that case, the expected behavior is that nothing happened related to request a downgrade codification or something like that. Then we have the second one, that is mandatory labels. Normally, from the field, it's not recommended if you are starting with labels and your end user doesn't have clear about how to use the labels. Maybe in a midterms, after the end users know about the labels, you can turn in on this one to have mandatory label. When you set mandatory labels, this is another very important point. When you set mandatory labels, you cannot able to remove labels. That means any document will be labeled. And if you need to share with external people, you will need to have the right label to share with that external people, because you will not able to remove if you're using mandatory labels. The third one, if you're using Fabric or Power BI. And the last one is if it's to give to the end users an internal URL or external URL with your data classification policy or this digital information threat policy that explain how they need they need to classify and labeling the information. Then coming a more granular configuration that is set a default label for all the documents, the default label for Outlook for emails, or if we want to inherit the label from attachment. Here you can see is highest priority. In some moment was appearing the most restrictive, but it's not related to restriction because it's only based on the order of the labels. We can do that automatically or we can recommend. Then for meetings, there is another structure related how the meetings are created on emails. For us, it's the same, send an email or send a meeting, but in the background, that works in a different way. For that reason, we will see different behavior for or different configuration for emails or meetings. But if you're using some configuration for emails, you can set the same configuration for meetings. Then we have site and groups, Fabrics and Power BI, and the name. This name cannot be changed. If you want to change the name of the policy, you need to create a new policy and set all the configuration on the new policy because this name cannot be changed. And that is the policy. Now, this is very important. Let me open PowerTool. We will use the connect IPP session. You can find this command led on the Exchange Online Management PowerTool model. This permits us to connect to the service and request some additional information. So let me connect. Okay, let's jump here. We are connecting now to the information. This is information protection power tool session. That is the IPPS session. That is the all the name. And here we can start using commands to get label information, get label policies, get and modify the configuration. I will, in this case, I am getting the list of labels, but I will show you some specific tips that can be helpful. I remember that someone shared on the chat a very helpful link that we can use to translate, because that is supported on PowerTool, to translate the labels to different language. Here we can see, but let me go to the policies. My policies, get label policies, label policies. With this one, I will get all my policies. I have only 8, 9 policies. Sorry, select name. By the way, here we can see some information, but on each of these one, we can identify additional configuration. To review the additional configuration, I will use a trick here. Give me a moment, where I will get only the name of the policies. And something that we can do here is I want to get all the information about my global policy. With this one, I can get all the information for that specific global policy, but there is some nested information that sometimes cannot be get easily. Something that we can do in this case, this is a big change, is new, and it's more easy to see. This was not available a couple of months ago. Now it's more easy to see. What we was doing previously to this was putting this one on parentheses and add, let me see if that works, and get only the settings related to that specific global. And this permit me to see all the rest of configuration, because here I have some additional configuration that is not able to add through the web interface, like change the language. That is very important. There is several commandlets that can be used. The other big deal, and let me jump to another computer. Here is my user mic, and there is a power tool module, and this one I will chart this one immediately on the chat, because previously, well, the Microsoft Purview client is still available. The Microsoft Purview client is still available, and we can still using the Microsoft Purview client to add on Windows, because it's only available on Windows, the capability to apply sensitivity labels, remove protection, or change the sensitivity labels to a lot of files under a folder or a specific file. We can play in that way with the client. And the other advantage that have this client, but this client is only available for Windows, is if something is not working properly, here always have the capability to reset the configuration. But this reset configuration is only local, is only for Windows. But let me back to my desktop. This PowerTool commandlet that is called compliance utility can be installed as a PowerTool module. And this compliance utility can be very helpful to reset the configuration, and it's available for Mac as well, but permits to collect information and record the problems and export specifically the logs, event viewer, registry that are associated to the problem that you want to get. This is very helpful for troubleshooting. I want to validate if I have access to the URL. The only thing that I need to do is connect, and with this one, I will see if I am reaching the right URLs. Okay, in this case, the PowerTool module required was not available. I'm installing the PowerTool. Let me execute again, and I will get the endpoint URLs. And this one will go to start getting and see if I am reaching all the URLs. This, or I can check if I am collecting the policies, the labels, and all of that. Let me, to connect to the service, I need an admin account to validate in this case. This is very helpful if you are working to troubleshoot a specific case. If it's not working, the case, let me approve this one, is 90. You can use this kind of tools to help to you to identify that kind of problems. And here we can see that I'm reaching and all is working properly. This is another very important point with sensitivity labels that are using in the backend RMS template. And the RMS template I was mentioning that there is several steps to validate the templates that are downloaded because we use digital signatures, we use certificate, we use hatches to validate that there is no kind of man in the middle changing the encryption usage and that kind of things. Uh, every time that we need to connect, this certificate needs to be valid. If you use an SSL inspection or sometimes a proxy, that certificate can be changed and the RMS templates will never be downloaded. You will see the label, but as I mentioned previously, sensitivity labels doesn't have protection. Under the hood, an RMS template is created and linked to that sensitivity label, and the RMS template will never be downloaded if the digital certificate doesn't match. That is another very important point in this configuration. Uh, the other, well, there is several things here. I'm trying to read the most important point related to from the field, some stuff that happened. The certificate is something. These tools can be very helpful to identify the problems. Remember that the change of the client is still available for Windows, but the add-in added to the Office, the Microsoft 365 apps, was removed. Related to the MIP scanner, I shared early my YouTube channel. This session will be shared on the YouTube channel, and there in that YouTube channel, you can find information about Exadata match, sensitive information types, and the MIP scanner if you want to go more in depth on these topics. Now, we have pending to go to the auto labeling. In the auto labeling, and I want to share something that can be helpful for you. I have the link in the mic desktop. This is a very interesting case to review, is to apply a sensitivity label, but to the voicemail that all of us will receive when we use Teams and someone doesn't find in, we receive in our emails a voicemail from Teams. In that case, we can protect that voicemail to avoid that someone forward that information to another people. Here, I will explain this one, voicemail protection. I created previously, and let me show you that, to use that specific case, I create a label only for the item email. That is one case that and the control access needs to be do not forward. That is the configuration. You can get that. Yeah, I am almost done in this case, David. I will give around 10 minutes for questions and answer, but I know that the Dominic and Darren was helping a lot on the chat. And with that configuration, we can configure auto labeling to work over email flow, to apply voicemail label when the sender IP address, every time that you receive a voice email because someone contacted you on Teams and you was not able and release a message, the IP address for the sender is always the same. That is in the link that I share on the chat. We need to identify this pattern in the header of the email. And in this case, I don't want to apply to the entire organization. In that case, I am reducing the scope only to the people in this distribution group. I can extend to anyone, or I can reduce it to a specific group. With this configuration, what is happening every time that I receive a voicemail, a sensitivity label is applied and the content is protected. That, I believe, there is other things that we can view. We have the report that we can view some general information. Uh, every time that we want to give more in deep, we will move to the Data Explorer or Activity Explorer. In this case, something that you can use to start viewing what's happening in your environment can be MPARR. MPARR is an open source solution that can be used to identify information about sensitivity labels, DLP, or any of the other 700 different operations that are happening in your environment. That is Microsoft Purview Advanced Reach Report. There is some available templates that can be used. I was showing that in other sessions. Right now, on Synergy that I'm working, is my new home. They have, well, we have a solution that permit to remediate for all the finding how we can go forward and change the labels or change the owners and doing several things. There is several solutions. We have MPARR, and then we have eSuite to do the next steps. And let's go to the Q&A. I know that the time was running very quick. Remember that we are sharing a survey for all the people that complete the survey. We will raffle some Amazon gift card that Synergy, as a sponsor, give us to the people that is participating today in this session. We have 10 minutes to answer some questions. You can feel free to write on the chat or raise your hand. I know I see some people that was sharing some answers. Here, let me see on the Q&A. What API or SDK are available? Okay, there is here Darren is sharing something. I am in the Q&A part. Coming soon, that will be only a preview comment. Coming soon, a new Purview API that will be available at the end of this year. That will help. That will be an additional help to the MIP SDK. Let me see which other question that we have here. Yes, how will sensitivity labels interact with other Microsoft security and compliance tools such as Microsoft Defender, Intune, and Azure Information Protection? Azure Information Protection is Microsoft Information Protection. The name was changing a lot during all these years, but in the background, as always, is the RMS service that the one is protecting. The sensitivity labels permit, and you can find on the QQL, on advanced hunting, there is several queries that can be created to identify who is applying some labels, who is storing certain kind of information in their desktop. There is several interesting queries that can be created for that. Uh, there is something related to conditional access, and it's related to the access control for the sensitivity labels used on groups and sites. Uh, what mechanisms will be used to collect feedback from user and stakeholders? At least on sensitivity labels, the only feedback to say is when you apply a business justification, when you are downgrading or changing a label. But solutions like MPARR or eSuite permit to create report that can be shared to C-level users and show what is happening with the labels, if the labels are in use, compare with the daily work and several other things. That can be very helpful to start generating that metrics that can be used with C-level users. What processes are in place to regularly review and refine our sensitivity labels approach based on emerging threat and regulatory change? Unfortunately, the report related to sensitivity labels in the Microsoft Purview are very basic. And as I mentioned, there is other tools that can be used to generate report that can be used for that specific approach. Microsoft currently they decide to don't release more tools related to report for sensitivity labels or Purview. The current report is the report that exists from Microsoft side, and for that reason, I am sharing these another solutions. How does Microsoft approach to data governance and compliance influence the development and adoption? Coming some changes that can be very helpful, but finally, the way the approach for data governance are services that the partners are delivering based on certain kind of workbooks, because there is no way to a magic tool to resolve that kind of things. We need to go forward through, as I always mention, process, procedures, roles, responsibilities, and permissions. That normally is the way to go forward in this kind of project. How will sensitivity labels be managed and maintained in the event of disaster or significant? As I mentioned, when we use the labels, the information is downloaded on each computer in a cache that permit to continue accessing. Microsoft in the background have a lot of capabilities, Microsoft 365, to replicate the data and avoid that kind of disaster of disruption. Uh, but you can try to reach me later on LinkedIn or through email, and I can explain several other tools that are available and all the documentation that Microsoft share about the steps and manage and maintain that in the case of disaster and that kind of things. Uh, Let me see. This one have an answer. Here, this one have an answer, and the rest have an answer. And let me see on the chat now if we have something else. Yeah, someone was asking for MPARR. Yes, I'm still working, and it's something that I am discussing in my new company that I'm working on, because Synergy work with eSuite, and we match in some point, but we will still working on MPARR as an open source solution and give the capability to remediate and uh, share the next steps that are very helpful to go forward. Uh, How do you manage sensitivity labels in a collaborative environment where documents are frequently shared and edited by multiple users? Adding groups. On the permissions, remember that when we define who have access, we have the options to set groups, or in the worst case, the entire organization, to avoid that kind of problems. In general, it's very simple to work on that. Is not a big deal. It's something that we can discuss later. You can reach me through LinkedIn. There is in the survey that I share. You can answer that you will be contact to one-on-one to discuss more in depth about this topic. And any other questions, comment? I really appreciate your participation today, that you come into this one. Please try to follow me on LinkedIn. You can find me by my name. And because the idea is continue and back to start doing this kind of webinar at least once a month. That is what I want to do. And any of you are welcome every time that you can participate. In that order of idea, I want to give my thanks to Darren, that was my co-organizer today, and Darren and Yusuf, that was answering as well. The gift card will be raffled between the people that answer the survey. There is 4 gift cards that I will raffle in a while, and I will send an email to the winners. And if the winners want to share their names, we will share that information on LinkedIn. That is much appreciated for all of you that participated today. Thanks, and please follow. I share the YouTube channel. This session will be recorded and shared soon. Have a great rest of the week.
Thanks all. Have a great one.